For decades, Bigfoot has lived at the edge of our imagination, a shape in the periphery. Giant prints pressed into muddy banks, a high, close call on a moonlit ridge, and grainy photos that never quite resolve into proof. We've chased the idea of a hidden, thriving population, a secret that endures because it seems endless. But what if we've been wrong in a way that matters more than we feared? What if the story isn't of multiplication in the deep woods, but of quiet decline, a species slipping toward extinction while the strongest signals of that decline were overlooked, misread, or deliberately buried? Tonight we open a door most researchers are reluctant to walk through. Is Bigfoot going extinct? This isn't idle speculation or the wild guess of late-night forums. It's a question that fits a pattern stitched together from field notes, degraded DNA fragments, ranger logs, and the slow, steady silence of places that used to hum with encounters. Each thread alone is unsettling. Together, they form a picture that demands attention. Listen closely. Where once there were clusters of credible sightings, the reports have thinned. Trail cameras that used to trap fresh prints and fleeting shadows now show fewer events, and when they do catch something, it often looks like the same gaunt, elder-looking walker reappearing across years. Acoustic archives that once held a rich chorus of long-range howls, complex cries, and rhythmic knocks now reveal a narrower, quieter vocabulary. Native elders who remember abundant contact tell a different story when asked today. Their children have not seen what their grandparents described. In valleys and ridgelines that once hosted family groups, the signs have faded, and in several documented cases, the last known breeding grounds were cut, flooded, or turned into roads and fences soon after a spike of secretive human activity. There are eyewitness accounts that chill the imagination, solitary figures moving as if avoiding others of their kind, odd movement patterns from animals that should be social, and then nothing, a presence erased from the map. Meanwhile, a handful of laboratories examining hair and tissue samples have reported degraded genetic profiles and unexpected anomalies that suggest low diversity and repeated inbreeding. Those findings are partial, cautious, and not definitive on their own, but they match what field observers and elders are saying. Something has changed. And it isn't just better camouflage or a new respect for secrecy. In this program, we will bring forward the evidence few talk about. We will trace the shrinking map of encounters, show the genetic oddities troubling independent analysts, and lay out the range of reports and eyewitness testimonies that together point toward decline rather than mere scarcity. We will also examine why these clues have been sidelined, from budgetary excuses to choices made inside agencies to suppress or downplay inconvenient findings. Finally, we will show the steps that can still be taken, how investigators and citizens can document what remains, protect fragile habitats, and demand the scientific scrutiny this question deserves. Stay with us. By the end of this episode, you will understand why the continuance of these creatures is far from certain, what specific signs to watch for, and what could be lost if we fail to act now. To make a claim this unsettling, we need more than anecdotes and blurry photos. We need people who have spent years in the field, who understand animal behavior, and who can read patterns across time and place. So we drew from a wide cross-section. Independent cryptid researchers who kept meticulous private logs for decades, retired wildlife biologists and technicians who managed remote camera networks and conducted ecological surveys, indigenous elders who carry generations of oral knowledge about movement corridors and seasonal signs, and a handful of laboratories that have handled the physical material, hair, tissue, scat, and old camera footage when it's surfaced. When those voices and data converge, the picture they paint stops feeling like folklore and starts to look like a conservation problem. Consider the testimony of a former regional wildlife technician who quietly agreed to speak with us. He spent 20 years maintaining camera arrays in the Cascades and the Northern Rockies. In the 1980s and 90s, his teams would routinely find clusters of fresh prints near salmon-spawning creeks and berry stands. Camera traps would register multiple passes in a single night, prints, scat, and even the characteristic rubbing of branches and intentional tree modifications that suggested social behavior or territory marking. Those were not isolated flukes, they were repeated patterns across seasons. But in the last 10 to 15 years, his logbooks show a different reality. The arrays still recorded movement, but far less often. When images did appear, they tended to be of solitary gaunt walkers, often showing older body condition, thin foot pads, slumped posture, a slower, halting gait. Juvenile trackways, the small trailing prints that signal a new generation, were conspicuously absent. Where once a creekside patch might yield signs of a family group, cameras now captured a single, lonely passage and then silence for months. For someone who cataloged thousands of nights of footage, the shift was unmistakable. That field-level change is echoed in the stories elders told us. Indigenous knowledge is place-based and intergenerational. Across several nations, Elders remember well-worn corridors, ridge routes, taken seasonally, communal feeding grounds that supported multiple family groups. One elder put it plainly, "We used to know where they would dig for roots. My father showed me. Now my children ask, do they still come?" That is the first time I have heard that question. These memories are not museum pieces. They are living knowledge of where animals were reliably seen and what healthy populations looked like. When that memory turns to uncertainty, it signals more than changing attitudes. It reflects a changed landscape. The physical evidence, when available, adds another layer. Several independent labs that agreed to analyze hairs, fragments of tissue, and scat from private collectors reported the same surprises. The recoverable DNA was degraded and, where enough sequence could be read, unusually homogeneous across samples, separated by large distances and years. Microsatellite markers and mitochondrial fragments suggested low genetic diversity, exactly the sort of pattern conservation biologists associate with population bottlenecks. No lab has published a complete genome. These findings are cautious and partial. But when you combine degraded genetics with declining encounters and lost corridors, the trend becomes worrying. We must also note the institutional context that has shaped what we know and what we do not. Government agencies and academic institutions have, broadly speaking, refused to mount exhaustive public investigations. Reasons given range from jurisdictional ambiguity to tight budgets. More disturbingly, internal memos and interviews reveal a real discomfort. Acknowledging a possible, real population would trigger legal and political obligations, protective measures, economic trade-offs, and public scrutiny that many agencies are reluctant to confront without what they call incontrovertible proof. That hesitation has created a vacuum. Evidence that might have driven conservation action has instead accumulated in private hands, in obscure lab freezers, or behind redacted memos. Taken together, field logs, oral histories, laboratory cautions, and institutional silence, these voices form a context that demands attention. This is not a rush to certitude. It is a sober assembling of qualified observations from people who have watched change happen over decades. If we are to answer the question we opened with, whether the creatures themselves are slipping toward extinction, we cannot ignore this cross-checked, uncomfortable context. Before we lift the curtain on the central evidence, we need to lay out the anomalies, each one small on its own, but together they form a troubling pattern. We assembled data from archived sighting databases, private field logs, ranger incident reports, trail camera archives, acoustic collections, and the handful of laboratory analyses that were agreed to by private collectors. Taken as separate fragments, the signals could be written off as chance or increased secrecy. Taken together, they point in the same direction. First, a shrinking map. Historic clusters of encounters that once formed continuous bands across mountain ranges and river valleys are fragmenting into isolated pockets. When you map reliable reports over decades, the median distance between credible sightings grows. In plain terms, encounters are not just rarer, they're farther apart, where communities and researchers once expected regular activity along seasonal corridors. Those corridors now show long gaps. Fragmentation like this is a familiar early warning, and conservations of populations become disconnected, and the chances for breeding and genetic exchange fall. Second, missing young field teams, private researchers, and long-term camera operators all report the same absence. Juvenile trackways are vanishing. Trail camera sequences that used to show trailing small, quick steps following an adult now record adults alone or occasional pairs. Over multiple breeding seasons, the near absence of youthful prints suggests either a collapse in successful reproduction or high juvenile mortality. In any long-lived mammal, a drop in juveniles over several years is not a short-term fluctuation. It's a demographic alarm. Third, a quieter language. Acoustic archives from the 1970s through the 1990s held a wide variety of vocalizations, long-range calls, complex modulations, rhythmic knocks on hollow wood. Recent decades recordings are narrower in range and less complex. Longtime audio archivists note that the surviving calls match only parts of the older repertoire, as if the communication system has simplified. That pattern fits what ethologists call loss of social complexity when group size and interaction decline. Simpler calls, more nocturnal activity, and solitary movement patterns reported by eyewitnesses all point to stressed, dispersed individuals rather than cohesive family groups. Fourth, genetic oddities. Several independent labs that analyzed hairs, scat, or tissue fragments reported degraded DNA and unusually low diversity in the fragments they could read. Microsatellite scans and mitochondrial fragments showed surprisingly similar markers across samples taken hundreds of miles apart and years apart in unexpected homogeneity. Degraded genetic material alone doesn't prove anything definitive, but low diversity and repeating markers are classic signs of past bottlenecks and limited gene flow. When labs saw partial damaged sequences repeatedly, they flagged population history explanations as plausible. Fifth, altered ground and lost corridors. Historical maps, logging and mining permits, and on-the-ground interviews show that key seasonal ranges and likely breeding sites were changed in ways that reduced carrying capacity. Roads and clearings cut into old-growth enclaves. Seasonal wetlands were flooded behind dams. Fences and private developments severed low-linked corridors. In several documented cases, local observers noted a surge in human activity off-road vehicles at night, unauthorized clear-cuts trapped shortly before a sharp drop in animal signs. Habitat loss and disturbance are textbook drivers of decline. Sixth, removal, redaction, and reluctance. The institutional record matters. FOIA returns and interviews revealed redacted memos, internal recommendations to avoid alarming language, and at least one claim that a county office was told to stop logging unusual large tracts formally. Evidence that might have prompted protection was sometimes set aside, archived privately, or quietly discarded. Whether through bureaucratic caution or deliberate suppression, these behaviors created a vacuum where crucial signals could be ignored without public scrutiny. Each of these anomalies could be explained away in isolation: a camera network failing, more secretive behavior, a handful of degraded samples from old material. But their co-occurrence across independent data streams: spatial contraction, absence of juveniles, acoustic simplification, degraded and homogeneous genetic fragments, intensifying habitat disruption, and institutional silence compels a different reading. Patterns like this are what conservation biologists see when a population is breaking apart. We are not yet asserting a final diagnosis. What we have done is gather the threads that will let evidence either hold together or unravel. In the next section, we will place these threads side by side and show how their convergence points toward one stark possibility: the creatures we seek may be suffering a real, accelerating decline. What follows is not a single smoking gun, it is a pattern, many small, independent threads converging in one alarming picture. When we place them side by side, the story they tell is hard to ignore. Several lines of evidence point to a real and accelerating population collapse, not merely a rise in stealth or better camouflage. Here are the core facts that no one talks about together. 1. Declining encounter frequency and spatial contraction. Multiple independent databases, private field logs, archived sighting reports, and ranger incident files show a clear drop in credible encounters in regions that once produced regular reports. Areas that previously averaged dozens of encounters per decade now show only occasional, scattered records. At the same time, the remaining sightings are tighter and more isolated, forming small pockets rather than a continuous range. In conservation biology, this kind of geographic contraction is an early and familiar signal. Populations fragment, groups become isolated, and opportunities for genetic exchange shrink to absence of juveniles in track records. One of the simplest, most telling signs of a reproducing population is the presence of young. Trail camera archives and footprint series gathered over many years reveal a consistent absence of juvenile track patterns. Cameras that once caught adults, followed by smaller, trailing prints, now mostly show lone adults or elderly-looking individuals moving slowly, alone, or in pairs. Field researchers report almost no sequences of adult plus young that would indicate recent successful breeding. Reproduction can fail for many reasons, but a sustained lack of juveniles across multiple breeding seasons is a red flag no ecologist ignores. 3 genetic bottlenecks and anomalous DNA fragments. Samples submitted to several independent labs, hair, scat, and degraded tissue have produced a worrying set of results. While no lab has published a full genome, repeated microsatellite analysis and mitochondrial fragments point to unusually low genetic diversity. In several cases, samples separated by hundreds of miles and years showed surprisingly similar mitochondrial markers, suggesting limited gene flow between regions. Low diversity like this is typical of severe bottlenecks when a population shrinks. Breeding becomes more inbred and genetic variety collapses. That loss of genetic resilience accelerates decline, increasing susceptibility to disease and reducing adaptive capacity. For shifts in vocal and behavioral complexity, sound archives assembled over decades once brimmed with a wide range of vocalizations, long-range calls, variable modulations, and rhythmic chest beating or log drumming. Recent decades show a narrowing of that acoustic repertoire. Long-term archivists have noted fewer complex calls and more simplistic muted vocalizations. Witnesses describe solitary individuals behaving oddly, more nocturnal, more furtive, often moving erratically, as if avoiding contact. Behavioral simplification and reduced social signaling are consistent with stressed, aging populations where social structures have broken down and young learning individuals are scarce. 5. Habitat loss and key corridors and breeding sites. Historical maps, logging, and mining permit records, and underground interviews document clear incursions into prime seasonal ranges. Roads cut into old-growth stands, lowland corridors were fenced or developed, wetlands were flooded by dams, and recreational encroachments surged in previously quiet valleys. In several documented cases, locals reported a spike in illegal off-road activity, nighttime vehicle traffic, or unauthorized clearings in the years immediately before a sharp local drop in signs, where corridors are severed and feeding grounds are reduced. Carrying capacity falls and isolated groups can no longer sustain themselves. 6. Suppression, misclassification, and bureaucratic inertia. The institutional record matters. Records obtained through public requests and interviews reveal repeated recommendations to downplay unusual findings, to avoid alarming language, and sometimes to file reports in ways that remove them from public view. At least one claim came from within a county office that was allegedly told to cease formal logging of large, anomalous tracts, whether out of caution, fear of panic, or a desire to protect local economies. This pattern of deferral and redaction explains why crucial evidence often sits in private drawers, lost to scientific scrutiny. Individually, each of these anomalies might have an innocent explanation: a few bad samples, a camera network with gaps, or a spike in human disturbance that temporarily scatters animals. Together, their co-occurrence is compelling. Declining encounter rates, missing juveniles, genetic homogeneity, simplification of social signals, accelerated habitat loss, and administrative silence. Those are the same signs conservation biologists see when a population is breaking apart. If these creatures share life history traits common to large, long-lived mammals, slow maturation, low reproductive rates, wide territorial needs, then the combined signals are especially worrying. Small, isolated populations can collapse quickly once genetic diversity falls below critical thresholds and vital corridors are gone. This is not speculation dressed as drama. It is the logic of population dynamics applied to the data we actually have. We are not pronouncing a final verdict. What we are saying is this: the pattern exists, the warning lights are on, and the consequence of ignoring them is simple. If these signals are accurate, the species, whatever its taxonomy, is facing a crisis that will accelerate without timely, transparent, and scientific intervention. If the pattern we've described is real, there is no neutral ground left. We must move from curiosity to conservation. The next steps are simple in idea, but demanding in practice. They split into 3 urgent threads: science, law, and community, and each must be pursued with transparency, rigor, and respect. Ignore any one of them, and the chances of recovery slip away. First, the scientific response. Treat this as you would any species sliding toward extinction. A coordinated, transparent research program. That means building a multidisciplinary team: wildlife ecologists, geneticists, acoustic specialists, statisticians, and field-trained technicians, and giving them clear, public guidelines. Practical elements look like this: deploy denser camera arrays across suspected corridors, using standardized trap spacing and timestamps so data can be compared year to year. Run synchronized acoustic stations to capture night and dawn vocalizations with consistent sampling rates. Collect physical samples only under strict chain-of-custody protocols so labs can trust provenance, and prioritize non-invasive methods where possible, like hair snares and environmental DNA from water and soil. Most important, all data and samples must be cataloged in an open but secure repository. Private collections and hobbyist archives have value, but they also create gaps in suspicion. A public accredited archive allows multiple labs to test, replicate, and peer-review findings without fear of contamination or covert suppression. Funding must come from a mix of academic grants, conservation foundations, and independent donors so studies remain free of political pressure. Above all, publish in peer-reviewed journals and in plain language reports, so conclusions are subject to scientific scrutiny, not rumor. Second, the bureaucratic and legal response. Science alone cannot protect habitat. Recognition matters. If there is credible evidence of a distinct, declining primate, government agencies must be pressed to treat it as a potential conservation case. That means emergency habitat protections for identified corridors and feeding grounds, temporary moratoria on disruptive activities, logging, new access roads, mining, and nighttime recreation while investigations proceed. It means instructing county and state wildlife offices to retain and catalog unusual large enable reports instead of filing them away, and to stop policies that quietly redact or suppress data. Legal pathways exist. Petition for emergency listing under endangered species frameworks where applicable. Request interim protective orders around known sites, and use environmental review processes to stall projects that would irreversibly alter habitat. Citizens and scientists should work together to file these petitions and to document harm in legally admissible formats. The aim is not sensationalism but time. a legal buffer that buys space for scientific study and, if needed, conservation action. Third, the citizen science and community response. Most new evidence comes from locals, hikers, and dedicated amateurs. That is a strength, but only if handled with discipline. We need standardized protocols that are simple enough for anyone to use. GPS coordinates with every report. Clear photographs and videos with scales for any prints. No tampering with scenes. Use of gloves and sterile containers when collecting potential samples. Immediate documentation of witness statements with dates and times. Create an accredited portal where reports are logged, time-stamped, and linked to samples with chain of custody labels. Teach volunteers how to use basic techniques and how to preserve evidence until professionals can collect it. Resist the usual temptations. Don't stage encounters, don't bait animals, and don't post raw, undeveloped materials online before experts can assess them. Hoaxes and sensationalism drown out real data and give institutions excuses to dismiss claims. Instead, cultivate patient, repeatable observation. Good citizen science is methodical, quiet, and accountable. There is also a political warning we cannot ignore. Our records show repeated tendencies to downplay or defer uncomfortable findings, whether to avoid public panic, to protect economic projects, or because agencies lack the mandate to act. If institutions prioritize short-term interests over transparent science, evidence will remain fragmented and any real population will shrink in silence. Beyond losing a species, we risk normalizing a system where inconvenient biodiversity is pushed aside. That precedent would harm future conservation efforts across the board. Finally, the people who live closest to these places must be partners, not afterthoughts. Indigenous elders, rural landowners, and long-term residents hold the best knowledge of seasonal routes, feeding grounds, and behavioral patterns. Empower them with training, legal protections for reporting, and roles in decision. Provide funds for community monitors, create hotlines for secure reporting, and ensure cultural protocols guide research on traditional lands. Treat local testimony as primary data and compensate communities for their time and risks. The path forward is clear in outline: rigorous, transparent science, legal recognition and emergency protections, disciplined citizen involvement, and community partnership. Each step is doable. Each requires courage to confront, ridicule, and push for accountability. If we act now, with method, patience, and respect, we might document what remains, protect key habitats, and understand a phenomenon that belongs to our continent's living history. If we delay, the silence will grow louder. The stakes are not just the fate of an elusive creature. They are the integrity of how we decide what lives are worth protecting. This is a call to scientists, officials, and neighbors alike. Stop treating the question as a curiosity and start treating it as a conservation emergency. The evidence has lit the warning signs. How we respond now will decide whether this story is one we can save or one we only whisper about in hindsight. If you care about documenting and protecting what remains, there are concrete things you can do tonight. Simple, safe, and designed to preserve evidence rather than destroy it. Every careful action increases the chance that usable data survives. Here's a step-by-step guide you can follow now. 1. Observe. Don't chase. If you suspect an encounter, your first priority is safety, yours, and the animals. Do not run after a figure into the woods, and never try to corner or capture an animal. Instead, stop, note the time, and make a quick mental map of where you are. Look for escape routes and stay where you can be seen from a distance. If the subject moves away, don't pursue. Give it space. Disturbance can scatter whatever evidence exists and can make future encounters less likely. To document thoroughly and accurately, use your phone or camera to take multiple photos and videos from a safe distance and keep your hands steady. Make sure timestamps and GPS tags are enabled. If you find footprints, place a ruler, coin, or another object with a known size beside a print before photographing, but do not step in or reshape the print. Photograph prints from multiple angles and take an overhead shot to capture the whole pattern. Note, the substrate: mud, sand, snow, weather, and weather prints look fresh, soft edges. Wetness or older cracks. Leaf cover. For audio, use a recorder away from other noise and note wind direction and nearby sounds. These small details matter to scientists. 3. Collect only when safe, legal, and trained. If you are not trained or if collection is prohibited on the land, don't try to gather samples. For those who are able and permitted, always use disposable gloves, sterile vials or bags, and clean tools. Collect hair by using clean tweezers and place each sample in paper envelopes, not plastic, and label immediately with date, time, GPS coordinates, and your name. For scat, use a sterile scoop into a sterile container and freeze it as soon as possible. For tissue or other fragile material, Contact an accredited lab or local university for guidance before touching anything. Improper collection contaminates samples and can render them useless. For use, standardized reporting forms and channels. Don't post primary evidence raw to social media first. That often gets sensationalized and can compromise chain of. Instead, fill out a clear report, your contact information, exact coordinates, date and time, environmental context, weather, and a concise description of what you observed. Attach photos, audio files, and any sample labels. Submit these to local wildlife authorities, recognized research groups working with standardized protocols, or a trusted citizen science portal that preserves records and chain of custody. If you don't know who to contact, reach out to nearby university biology departments or regional conservation NGOs for direction. 5. Preserve the scene. Never move, wash, or clean tracks, nests, or scat. If you must leave the area, mark the location gently with biodegradable materials or GPS waypoints rather than altering the site. Encourage others to stay away until trained personnel can assess it. The arrangement of tracks and surrounding vegetation tells a story that is lost the moment someone tramples it. 6. Protect habitat locally. Become an active voice in land use decisions. Attend town council or planning meetings. Speak up at permit hearings and ask for environmental assessments when development is proposed near known old-growth patches, riparian corridors, or seasonal wetlands. Support conservation easements and local land trusts that can buy or safeguard key parcels. Even small parcels can be critical linkages between larger blocks of habitat. Map what you know. Combine your observations with public trail maps, watershed boundaries, and timber harvest plans to show officials where corridors may be at risk. 7. Pressure for transparency and responsible record keeping. File a records request, FOIA, or your state's equivalent for incident logs, camera trap data, and internal memos about unusual large anomal encounters. Ask for unredacted incident reports and any chain of custody logs for evidence. If an agency resists, escalate by contacting elected officials, state ombudsmen, or local investigative journalists who can apply public pressure. Transparency discourages informal suppression and encourages proper cataloging of physical evidence. 8. Support independent science and respect indigenous knowledge. Donate to or volunteer with organizations that commit to rigorous methods and open data. Encourage local universities to offer grants and internships that fund standardized fieldwork and lab analysis. Most importantly, consult and collaborate with indigenous communities before conducting research on traditional lands. Engage tribal councils and elders as partners. Pay for their time. Follow cultural protocols and incorporate their knowledge into research design. Their seasonal knowledge and long-term observation are among the most reliable data we have. Finally, avoid hoaxes and sensationalism. Baiting sites, staging evidence, or spreading unverified claims destroys credibility and wastes precious time and resources. If you see someone hoaxing or tampering, document that activity and report it to authorities. Credible science moves forward by careful, repeatable work, not by viral spectacle. These practical steps are not bureaucratic busy work. They are the difference between usable data that can guide conservation and a pile of stories that end with a shrug. Tonight, take one small action. Enable GPS tagging on your camera. Learn the name of the local wildlife office or bookmark the nearest university biology lab. Each discipline choice preserves a path toward answers. If there is still a population out there, it deserves to be documented and protected the way any at-risk species would be. If it's gone, careful records will tell that truth too, and that truth will be worth knowing. We began this program with a single, hard question. Is Bigfoot going extinct? After tracing footprints across decades of field notes, listening to tapes that are losing their songs, and following fragments of DNA that whisper of a shrinking gene pool. The answer is no longer a comfortable shrug. The pattern is real, and it is urgent. Declining encounters, a near absence of young, genetic bottlenecks, simplified vocal repertoires, severed corridors, and a consistent pattern of bureaucratic silence do not add up to mere mystery. Taken together, they read like the early chapters of a collapse. That realization should change how we respond. This is not about proving folklore. It is about treating an empirical signal with the same seriousness conservationists bring to any species at risk. The stakes are high on 3 levels. First, there is the biological loss. An unknown primate, possibly unique in its behavior and ecology, would be gone forever. Second, there is the cultural loss. Generations of indigenous knowledge and local memory, threaded through landscape and language, would be silenced without proper record or respect. Third, there is the democratic cost. Evidence ignored or suppressed sets a dangerous precedent that expediency can outweigh biodiversity and public accountability. The path forward is clear if we choose to walk it. Science must be given its due. Rigorous, transparent work that can be reviewed, replicated, and built upon. That requires funding, academic partners, and open repositories for evidence so that hair, scat, and recordings are not locked in private boxes or dismissed by fearful agencies. It requires standardized protocols for cameras, acoustics, and genetic sampling so data from different teams can be compared and modeled. It requires population viability modeling that can tell us whether remaining pockets have a realistic chance to persist, and habitat analysis that identifies the corridors that must be protected to keep gene flow alive. But science alone cannot fill the gap. Legal recognition matters. If credible evidence indicates a real animal with a shrinking population, conservation law and emergency protections are tools that can slow or halt destructive activities in key areas. We must push for candid agency reviews, for the cataloging and preservation of physical evidence, and for policies that prioritize conservation over short-term economic gain when the two clash. Citizens should demand transparent records, press agencies to release unredacted incident reports, and use public oversight to prevent quiet removal of crucial data. Everyday people have a role that is both immediate and responsible. The best help is disciplined, not dramatic. Observe without chasing. Document with GPS and timestamps, preserve scenes, and submit material through accredited channels. Learn the names of local wildlife offices and the nearest university labs. Enable GPS tagging on trail cameras you maintain. Support organizations that combine field rigor with respect for local communities. Resist the temptation to make a spectacle of any encounter. Hoaxes and baiting are not just dishonest, they destroy credibility and waste precious time. Most important of all is partnership with the original stewards of this knowledge. Indigenous elders and local residents have monitored these landscapes for generations. Their memories, place names, and seasonal knowledge are often the best maps we have of where activity once was concentrated. Treat them as collaborators, pay for their time, follow cultural protocols, and center their consent in any research on traditional lands. Without that partnership, any conservation plan will be incomplete and likely ineffective. We close with a choice. We can dismiss these signals as curiosities and let silence continue to grow, or we can act with science, with law, and with community to ensure that whatever remains is documented and, if possible, preserved. This is not a call to worship a myth. It is a call to honor evidence and to protect a living part of our continent's natural and cultural heritage. If you care about biodiversity, about truth, and about the stories our elders passed down, then use your voice, ask questions at city halls, support research grants, file records requests. Teach your neighbors how to document without destroying. Remember the elder who asked, "Do they still come?" That quiet question is now our deadline. The actions we take tonight, this month, this year, will decide whether future generations will ask the same question with wonder or only with regret. The mystery remains, but the evidence has stopped being merely tempting. It is a warning. The truth is out there, and this may be the last real chance to save it. If the previous blocks made the stakes clear, this next phase must translate urgency into a workable plan. Block 8 is the field manual for what comes next, a realistic, ethically grounded roadmap that communities, scientists, and officials can start using immediately. We don't promise miracles, we promise structure, priorities, and a timetable that can turn scattered observations into defensible science and meaningful protection. First, a short case. A mountain valley in the northern ranges where elders once described regular movement along a riparian corridor. Over 2 decades, the valley saw selective logging, a new gravel road, and a surge in nighttime ATV use. Sightings fell from dozens a decade to a handful. Camera traps showed thinner, older walkers, and a private sample returned degraded mitochondrial fragments consistent with bottlenecked populations. That valley is now a microcosm of the larger pattern: habitat severed, evidence scattered, and official attention minimal. It shows how quickly continuity can collapse and how focused effort might still recover usable data. From that case, we build an operational triage, 3 priorities to be implemented within the next 36 months. Priority 1. Secure and standardize evidence, 0 to 12 months. Establish a centralized, trusted repository for physical materials and raw data. This can be hosted by a university lab or independent conservation NGO with transparent chain of custody and public access policies. It must accept hair, scat, high-resolution video, and acoustic files. Roll out a standardized evidence kit and protocol for volunteers and field teams. GPS logging, time-stamped media, scale for tracks, sterile collection for biological material, and immediate refrigeration. Training modules, video plus one-page checklists should be distributed to local communities and research partners. Launch coordinated camera and acoustic arrays in priority corridors